Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the transfer list with me, Harry Symeou. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by European football expert Andy Brassell and Rory talks football. And we're going to go through some potential transfer targets that the Gunners could be looking at come the summer. We're going to get Andy's thoughts and Rory's thoughts on the players. And there's only really one place to start, guys, and that is with who I think it's fair to say would be the dream candidate for Gunners fans, and that's Newcastle United's Alexander Isak. Andy, is he the dream candidate? I mean, I certainly think he is. For you, is he the right fit?
Well, I think the problem is, you know how vital he is to Newcastle. I live in Newcastle, so I see Newcastle United fairly regularly. And what is clear is whatever their PSR problems might be, there is no way they can sell him. If they sold him for 150 million, 160 million, they would still, firstly, no one could pay that. Secondly, there's no way they could replace him. He has morphed into, if not the best striker in the Premier League, really, really close. I always have to have that Erling Haaland shadow in the back of my mind, because people talk about him having an average season. His average season is still better than like most people's best ever season. So I think with Isak, it's the all-round package, the fact that when he was at Real Sociedad, he used to miss quite a lot of sitters. He still misses the occasional sitter, but you know that happens to even the best striker. I think his efficiency in front of goal has been much better. Always as an all-round player, it was clear that he could be something else. And I think what's the most important when we look at all these candidates for Arsenal is the technical level. So can he offer something different, and can he offer the technical level which will fit with what Arteta wants to do? You say yes, and you add 25 Premier League goals to that. I mean, what more is there to say?
Rory, in terms of his strengths, I mean, Andy's touched on some of them, but what really kind of stands out to you? And why do you think, I'm assuming you think that he'd be a really good fit for the Gunners?
Yeah, I mean, look, it feels like as well every time we play against Newcastle, he really reinforces just how much we could do with him. Those games seem to really kind of exaggerate that point, but I think it's the Goldilocks kind of perfect candidate in terms of his hold-up play, his ball striking ability, pacing behind. It does feel like, you know, age profile is still good. You know, if you looked at what would be the perfect striker for us, and clearly that's why the club have seemingly been holding out for it, it just feels like him.
Not wanting to repeat what you guys have said, but it does feel to me like he ticks every single box. Love the way he can drop deep, love the way he can run channels. He doesn't look like the most well-built, but he seems to have this strength to be able to hold off, you know, some of the biggest centre-halves. He gave Gabriel and Saliba a torrid time just recently. But for me, the thing that I find really interesting about Alexander Isak is how early he hits the ball. I just love it. He takes a shot on a lot of the time before the goalkeeper's had a chance to set himself. He really backs himself to hurt the opposition. And that confidence, I think, is indicative of the way he's been playing. I mean, in terms of the likelihood of that happening, Andy, how do you see it? Because it's going to cost a hell of a lot of money, that's for sure.
Maybe 1 out of 10. I mean, honestly, you can understand Arsenal's interested in him. Any top club in the world really should be interested in Alexander Isak. He's reaching that kind of level. But like I said, he's just totally unaffordable in this market.
Rory, in terms of how much you'd like him, can you rank that out of 10 for us?
Yeah, that's the 10 out of 10 banker is Isak, yeah.
Let's talk about another player then. Benjamin Sesko, obviously playing his football over in the Bundesliga at the moment. He's a player that Andy will know a great deal more than me, definitely, about. What are his strengths and weaknesses, and how much would it cost, you think, to potentially get him out?
Well, with Sesko, it was always about his all-round game. And if I'm thinking of a dream and feasible candidate for Arsenal, Sesko is definitely it. He had the all-round game first before he developed the goal scoring. It's almost as if the goal scoring has sort of evolved with his ability to dominate games from the front. Because I think people look at the size of him and they'll think, proper target man. He can hold the ball up, he can win it in the air, but he's always been very good at creating for others. That was something that was clear at Red Bull Salzburg, in the fact that he had an all-round game there that Erling Haaland, his predecessor as Red Bull Salzburg #9, never did. So that was why people were very excited about him early on. I think he's, like Haaland, he's managed his career quite smartly. A lot of people would have expected him to go last summer, but staying the extra year at Leipzig has done him really good. He's dominating Bundesliga defences. He scores regularly. He scores spectacular goals. He scores all types of goals. I just feel that technical click is really nice. You look at the age as well, and he can get even better. I think Arteta would love to work with him.
There was a lot of reports over the course of the January window suggesting that, you know, Arsenal had explored the possibility. They'd even picked up the phone to RB Leipzig, but there was never a chance of getting that deal done. Is that consistent with what was being reported in Germany as well?
Yeah, exactly. So there was no January get-out clause. It appears there is a summer get-out clause. And it's around the 60 million mark, which I think is really, really reasonable in today's market.
Rory, how does Benjamin Sesko stack up for you? Is he the next best thing to sort of Alexander Isak? Is he on his way to being there at least?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's again in that bracket of kind of ticking every box. Obviously, he's slightly rawer than Isak is now, but it feels more like, you know, if you'd got Isak from Sociedad, he's at that point, but I think he's probably ahead of where Isak was at that time.
I did do some digging into the numbers around Benjamin Sesko just recently, though, Andy. I was looking at how involved he is in games, and when I compared his touches, number of touches in the opposition box and that kind of thing, he was quite a way behind Kai Havertz. However, in terms of the number of goals he'd scored and the assists he'd provided, he was on par. So he's not always the most involved centre forward, but is he showing an efficiency that shows that he can develop in that sense as well?
I think efficiency is quite a good way of putting it. And he does still get involved in the all-round game. It's just every contribution counts. I mean, if we go back to previous Arsenal centre forwards, and as well one who we were just discussing before, I think you look at Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who could touch the ball 15 times a game and still make the decisive contribution to win the game. He did the same at Borussia Dortmund. I think you look at Erling Haaland as well, who I think people assume he makes no assists because in the bits where he's not in the game, he's really not in the game. Sesko's more involved in the game than that. So I think that's a key difference.
How much do you think it's likely that Arsenal would be able to get him? We know there's a release clause, which I think gives people some confidence in that the deal could be done, but will there be others in the mix?
Yeah, I think there will, but Arsenal are at the head of the queue. I think there's a long-standing interest there. He fits exactly what they're looking for. He's something different. He's a player they can grow with and develop, which is what Arsenal are really looking for out there. I'd say this is a solid 8.5 out of 10.
Rory, in terms of how much you'd like to see him come in, how highly would you rank this out of 10?
It's an 8. I think it's an 8, yeah.
Sounds like a solid option. Let's move on to Victor Gyokeres, player playing his football at the moment in Portugal, but did spend some time, of course, here in England. Andy, tell us a little bit about him and how he's gotten on since leaving from Coventry City and going over to Portugal.
Well, Sporting made a massive commitment in buying him. I think we have to say that first off. They spent a club record transfer fee of just over 20 million euros to bring him in from the Championship as was at the time. He's just been peerless since he's been there. Ruben Amorim has made a massive contribution to him, and that I think was the little wobble that Gyokeres felt last summer when it looked for a little while as if Amorim might be on his way, and when he committed to stay. Obviously, he didn't last the entire season, but there was a sense of, you know, might this make Gyokeres go as well. The way he's developed, though, we've talked a lot about all-round game. I think you look at the number of goals he scored last season, over 40, and then on top of that, double figures in assists as well. So again, I think people look at him, people look at the build, how muscular he is. And I think that's a really important thing for him adapting to the Premier League, because of course he's thrived in the Championship, but not the Premier League yet. It's the fact that some of the best have tried every dirty trick they've got to try and put him off his game. I remember the first time Sporting played Porto and Pepe singled him out for special attention, and Gyokeres just bullied him. And that was the moment where you thought, OK, this guy is not just a good centre forward. He has got the capacity to become absolutely elite. The numbers have continued, an incredible lick. At the time of recording, 36 goals for Sporting this season, and he's missed the last couple of weeks through injury. He's got the pace to get in behind. He's a good one-on-one finisher. There's so much to him. I just think he might be destined for somewhere else in the Premier League.
Rory, how encouraging is it, the fact that he's obviously played in England and done quite well? Andy mentions that it was in the Championship, agreed, but it's always the physical side of the Premier League, isn't it, that we focus on when we're trying to assess whether a player could come over and work out. Does the fact that he played at Coventry City give you confidence that he could be the solution?
Yeah, 100%. And if you watch him play, there's no issues when it comes to physicality. I watched him for a long time last season. Massive, massive fan. And I think there's a bit of a misconception that he needs space in behind, because often there is a lot of space in behind in the league that he plays in. There's this misconception he needs that space in behind to thrive. It's just not true. The number of goals that he scored where the ball comes into his feet inside the box and it's one touch, hold the defender off, bang, and it's a goal. So often he's the ultimate sort of box presence. And I think he'd be absolutely fine in the Premier League. There's nothing really that I look at where you go, well, that could be a potential flaw to his game in the Premier League. So no, he'd be a very, very good striker for us.
Andy, am I right in saying that there's a release clause in place for Victor Gyokeres? If so, how much? And do you think there's a possibility of a deal being done at less?
There is the possibility of a deal being done at less. It's around 100 million euros, which is just over 80 million pounds. Sporting will sell him for less this summer. I think you're looking at around the 60 mark.
It's interesting. That sounds like a very reasonable price. What's the likelihood, in your opinion, then, Andy, of this one materialising?
I think if Arsenal really wanted him, they would have made a proper move for him already. I think they're looking for someone who's a little bit more technical. So that's why Sesko, I think, appears more likely to me. And I think Victor Gyokeres, as we mentioned before, has that special relationship with Ruben Amorim, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him end up at Manchester United. I'd give this a 5.
In terms of where he ranks on your want list, Rory, where would you put Victor Gyokeres?
For me, in the here and now, it's a 9 out of 10. I think if you're looking to bring in a striker that's going to hit the ground running in his prime, 9 out of 10.
I think the question is, can Arsenal front up and do the Sweden thing, get Isak and Gyokeres?
That would be nice, wouldn't it? Let's move on to Victor Osimhen, a man who was key to Napoli's recent Scudetto win, but has obviously moved on from there, Andy, and is playing his football currently in Turkey. What's the situation with Victor Osimhen?
And he's having an unbelievable time at Galatasaray, scoring almost a goal at start so far. It's been really good in the Europa League as well for Galatasaray. But you know he's a Champions League level player and a Serie A or Premier League level player. He's got everything to succeed in the Premier League. He's quick, he's totally focused, he's obsessed with scoring goals. I just kind of wonder if there's a little bit of the Fernando Torres about him, in that Torres always said that his natural qualities made him really suited for the Premier League, but the way the Premier League was meant it would eventually break his body. And I kind of wonder that about Osimhen, because he's an unbelievably brave striker who will stick his head where other people wouldn't stick their feet. Would this be a sort of problem for them? I mean, I think the idea about he fell off like Napoli did last season is just nonsense. I mean, he scored 15 league goals in a team that were awful and finished 10th. And there were all sorts of other problems with his contract, off pitch, the way the club treated him, all these other sort of things.
Rory, does the fact that he's gone to Turkey, does that change your perception of him? I don't mean this disrespectfully to Turkish football or to Galatasaray as a football club. I appreciate how big a football club they are within that world. But the fact that he went to Galatasaray, I think, has put a lot of Arsenal fans off in terms of looking at him as a potential option.
Yeah, no, the move to Galatasaray in itself wasn't something that would have put me off. I think it was kind of just a matter of circumstance. And I think the way that his eventual transfer out of Napoli, which is going to happen, has been handled for well over a year, was just poor. In terms of his ability, it's one of those, I think he can hit such a high level. And we saw that certainly in the season before last, that everyone wants him. He gets this insane price tag put on him. You're still seeing him banging goals for Galatasaray, so you can clearly still do it. I don't know what, it just feels like there's something missing. And maybe it is the lack of Premier League experience. I don't necessarily buy into that often, but yeah, I don't know what it is, but there's something just, I don't know, reserving me. I
wonder if Arsenal should be looking for someone outside the bubble. You know, something a bit different to what they have already. And, you know, when we were talking about them potentially bringing someone in January, which didn't happen, I was all for, well, why not try loaning someone? Loaning someone even, you know, I think when Man United loaned Henrik Larsson for something like that, you know, it doesn't always have to be your Mr. Forever, does it? You know, it just needs to be someone to provide you with something different to get you through the next little bit. Like I said, I love Osimhen. I would be super excited to see him in the Premier League. And because he's so different from anything Arsenal have, I think he'd actually be a massive hit there.
I do think that there's a sort of feeling around Arsenal that the maverick type player, which Osimhen can be, just doesn't fit in the environment. You know, I had this debate with someone recently, and Rory, feel free to share your views on this, but Alexis Sanchez, fantastic player, but would he have worked in Mikel Arteta's system? I don't think he would have. I don't think he would have had the freedom to express himself in the way that, you know, he would have loved to, and the way that he could under Arsene Wenger. Do you think that's fair, Rory?
Yeah, I think it is. I think you see every player at Arsenal now knows their role. You can tell that they adapt their game to fit into the system, and obviously Arsenal fans have differing opinions on whether or not that's worth it.
Andy, in terms of the likelihood of this happening, obviously his future does need to get resolved in a sort of more permanent way. He is currently on loan at Galatasaray. Is there any chance that he ends up there? Is there any chance that he ends up in the Premier League?
I think Galatasaray would turn every stone possible to keep him if they could. They know it's not financially possible for them. They looked at a number of different formulas, but they've since signed Alvaro Morata, knowing that that's not possible, and he'll be there next season as well, at least until January. So I think as the market recalibrates, maybe the perceived desires of Osimhen recalibrate as well. He had this reputation of asking for too much money, or his entourage had this reputation of asking for too much money, which doesn't really fit with PSR and the climate in the Premier League at the moment, which maybe made Chelsea back off a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised, especially with the release clause dropping a little bit, to see him end up in the Premier League. Maybe Chelsea will come back for him, but I don't think Arsenal's totally to be ruled out, because if it's a market opportunity, then maybe it's something a little bit different. So I'll go 5.
5 out of 10. Rory, in terms of how much you'd like to see him, is he someone that ranks high up your want list?
Yeah, I'd give him a 6 out of 10. I think relative to some of the other strikers we've spoken about and will speak about, yeah, I think a 6 out of 10. Great striker, and actually, I certainly don't think he'd lack goals if he played for us.
I think the key there is the market opportunity piece. If the right deal is there, then I think I'd be open to it as an Arsenal man. But if it wasn't, I don't think he's someone I'd be willing to throw a ton of money at and take a big risk and a big gamble on. I do want to move on to Robert Lewandowski. Now, if you'd have told me a little while ago that we'd still be talking about Robert Lewandowski as an option for Arsenal at the age of 36, 37, I'd have laughed at you. But he's playing so well, Andy, that he has to be in the conversation.
Yeah, it shouldn't be possible because, of course, he's one of the biggest names in world football. He plays for Barcelona and he's doing very well there, and he's quite old, which are 3 things that should make this not possible. However, as we know, Barcelona are in a very particular financial situation, which, if you know, is going to get worse. That's the way it is. You know, there are a lot of skeletons in the financial closet at the moment still. So Barcelona were forced to deny and forced to brief this week that they were not looking to cancel the contract of Robert Lewandowski. Imagine that. Cancel the contract of Robert Lewandowski at the end of this season, which runs until 2026. Because the question is, can they afford it going forward? We know things are very tight there at the moment. They've got a few big earners that they'd love to get rid of. Now, whereas Lewandowski is doing everything possible on the pitch, and he's in his best form for a number of years at the moment, despite the fact he's 36, he earns over £24.5 million a year.
Wow.
Like that, and that's after tax. So we're talking about a huge investment. If Barcelona were in the position where they had to let him go, I mean, surely clubs would think, OK, we'll take a year of Lewandowski. Now, bear in mind, he's going to be 37 at the start of next season, but I draw your attention to what I said before about he's in his best form for absolutely ages. As we know, his wife's dietitian, and she runs a very, very tight ship. So he's in incredible nick all of the time. He clearly worked very, very hard this pre-season. 31 club goals already this season. As we speak, he is absolutely unstoppable still.
Rory, what do you think of Robert Lewandowski? Has that kind of ship sailed? Is it too late in his career? Or is there still something there that attracts your attention to a player like that?
Yeah, I think there could be something there still. If you'd know bringing him in, okay, this is going to be one season. And much like when we lost Van Persie to Manchester United, that can work. For a season, that's what we need. And it'd be very exciting to see him in the Premier League, a striker of that level, to see how he'd fare. So yeah, I think if you just brought him in for a year and the whole fan base knew it's only for a year, and then you've got whatever target after that, no, I think it'd be great. I'd love it.
Andy, Mikel Arteta likes a centre-forward to drop deep, to run channels, to get involved in the link-up play. And we know that Robert Lewandowski's goal-scoring record is still incredible. But would he be able to, at this stage in his career, do you think, live up to all the expectations that Mikel would have outside of just contributing with goals? We
shouldn't expect Dortmund Lewandowski. Because he was someone who performed so many different functions for them, a linker of play, a number 9, a goal scorer. He can still do most of those things. Okay, he can't run the channels anymore, but he's still unbelievably fit. I think the intelligence to link the play is something that would make him fit with Arsenal and what they want. He would offer something completely different, because the thing that everyone overlooks with Lewandowski, because he's such an elite level centre forward, is he loves the rough stuff. Anything off the ball. I know there's 36 cameras in the stadium these days, but you can't pick everything up that he gets up to, because he loves to get into it with centre-backs, which I think would be amazing to see in the Premier League.
Rory, we've been discussing lots of different strikers, and we've been talking about some of them as maybe primary targets versus sort of secondary targets. How far do you have to go down the list before you start to consider an option like Robert Lewandowski on a short-term deal?
Yeah, I think you'd be quite far down the list at that point. I mean, you'd be looking at Isak going wrong, Sesko going wrong. As a backstop option, it's not a bad one to have, but we're definitely not going into this window with the approach of we'll take someone for a year and see what happens. So as a last resort, I'd absolutely love it, but you'd be saying, okay, where's it gone wrong?
Andy, likelihood out of 10 on this one?
This is difficult, because I would so love it to happen. I'm not really sure I can factor that into the number. Look, Barcelona have said they're not going to let him go. They are going to hold him till 2026. I suspect if they had an offer from the Saudi Pro League and a club there, I think they'd change their mind pretty quickly. But I think the wages alone, even if he was available, would put off most Premier League clubs, and he would shatter Arsenal's wage structure, for example. I mean, if he was coming for free, maybe there'd be a way of selling that, but I'm saying, 2 out of 10.
If we move on to a Serie A-based player, Dusan Vlahovic. Now, of course, he was linked with Arsenal in the past, and Arsenal fans generally have a bit of a bee in their bonnet when it comes to Vlahovic, because there was a feeling that he kind of used Arsenal to get a contract and to get what he wanted with Juventus.
That doesn't sound like him.
Does it not? Andy, go ahead, tell us a bit about him.
Well, look, the situation between him and Juventus, it's been a really unusual marriage of convenience since he arrived from Fiorentina, with a huge reputation, and he looked brilliant straight away. He's someone who can score from inside, outside the box. He's got good size. He's quick, but I just feel that his value of himself and Juventus's value of him is not commensurate with the player that he actually is. So there's still potential in there, but he's not a kid anymore. He's 26, and I look at him and I think, well, maybe you can step out of it and say Juventus haven't been particularly good at developing players in recent years, and he is part of that. It's part of the reason that him and Federico Chiesa wanted to both leave in the summer of 2023, and in fact they didn't want to work with Max Allegri anymore. But I think he's got to take some responsibility for that as well. Now, the fact is, he has been openly available for quite a long time now. But because Juventus want their money back, and they paid 70 million euros for him, is that really commensurate with what he's produced in recent times? Now, there's a lot of good things to like about him. Like I say, the ability's there. I think in the right team, he scores an absolute truckload of goals. And this season, I think, as Juventus have had quite a young team, he's been quite a good leader for those younger players. And he's taken that commitment very, very seriously, despite the fact his own position is quite uncertain. But look, his contract's running down. He's got a year after this that they want to sell. So, you know, when we were talking about market opportunities, he's not a plan for Arsenal. He's definitely not a plan for Arsenal, even though I think it'd be really interesting to see how he would fit in there. If he's available for a reduced fee, well, maybe. But he is the biggest earner in Serie A. You've got to remember that.
Rory, we're both Arsenal fans. We went through that roller coaster of hoping we get him and then being frustrated by that not happening and then questioning maybe whether his motive ever was to come to Arsenal or if it was to try and get a deal elsewhere. Where do you stand on Dusan Vlahovic? What do you see as his kind of strengths and weaknesses and how well will he fit?
Yeah, look, he's clearly a great striker. I think he would score plenty of goals for us. For me, I have always had a bee in my bonnet about the way that, and I don't know how close it ever was to happening or whether it was even his decision, but for me it felt like he missed the opportunity to join the project at an earlier stage and he missed the train. And now I don't think he's at an elite level enough for me to kind of go back on that and go, actually, maybe it'll still be worth it anyway. I think good goal scorer. I question how much the rest of his game fits in with Arsenal relative to even a Kai Havertz. And so it's not really something I'd go back in for.
When I watch him, I just don't see that elite player anymore. I see it in flashes, but nowhere near consistently enough. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't think that's unfair at all, Harry. I think what you've got to pick apart is how much of that is him and how much of that is the environment. I mean, I don't think the fact that Juventus haven't played great football for quite a long time, but better this year under Thiago Motta, and it feels to me that at least at the start of this season he was quite stimulated by that, and we saw his best form for a while. But having said that, he has lost his way a little bit. If you'd have said he'd be where he is now, at the point where he's arriving from Fiorentina, I think everyone involved, him, Juventus, would have been really, really disappointed. Even the Serbian national team would have been really, really disappointed as well. So I think it's quite easy to talk about a player's attitude when you perceive them from a distance. He's had so much other stuff going on. He's clearly been quite unfulfilled sport-wise at Juventus as well. And there's been the fact that they've been openly shopping him, which is not conducive really to you settling and doing your best. But it's weird to say someone who's got this sort of value placed on him by his club is 26 years old and scored a ton of goals in Europe and for his national team is still a kind of almost a reclamation project. But I feel that's what he is, really.
Rory, would you have him at the Arsenal? Would you take him? For me personally, the ship sailed.
Yeah, no, for me the ship sailed. I mean, I would take him if we end up in that position. But again, it would mean that for me, the plan for the summer has gone wrong.
That's how we're feeling as Arsenal fans. But likelihood, Andy, in terms of the way you see it from a neutral point of view and having that knowledge you do of Serie A and Juventus' workings.
He gets sold to the Premier League this summer. There's no doubt about it. He needs the move. They need the money before they lose everything on him. Again, it feels like an opportunity rather than something that would be part of Arsenal's plan. So I would give this 4, maybe.
Let's move on to another player, Jonathan David. I'm right in saying, Andy, that he's out of contract in the summer.
He is probably the free agent of next summer.
So there's going to be a queue of clubs, I'd imagine, looking at Jonathan David. His goal-scoring record has been pretty impressive over the last few years. Give us a bit of a rundown on kind of his strengths and weaknesses.
Well, I think the interesting thing about him is he's been incredibly underrated, really, over the last couple of years, because you look at him, you look at his age, you look at his commitment to getting better. He's been brilliant for Lille, just past the 100-goal mark, scored big goals in the Champions League this season. But this contractual situation is going to make him like the belle of the ball, really. Before, he was everyone's second choice, because I think people looked at him and thought, well, he's fast, but he's not explosively fast. He's strong, but he's not 6.5 foot and built like Chris Hemsworth. And he scores goals, but he doesn't score 30 goals a season, which are all a bit, yeah, but if you look at the package, he's got most things you would want from a centre forward. Now, he's sort of been in a weird place in the market because he sort of stood back and thought, right, if I'm going to leave Lille, which is a fairly big club in European terms and has done really well in the Champions League this season, I want to move to an absolute monster club where I feel I can prove myself, because he's not arrogant, but he's very, very confident in himself. And the market has gone, okay, he's the sort of guy we would buy if our first choice fell through. And that's left him in this sort of no man's land, which has led to the situation where his contract has run down. But all of a sudden, that changes everything, because obviously there's a signing on fee and wages. But if you don't have to pay 50, 60 million for a striker who probably should be sold for 50, 60 million, all of a sudden, loads of people are interested.
Rory, listening to Andy sort of break him down a little bit there, it started to remind me of Alexander Lacazette in terms of the style, where he wasn't that quick, but he could run. He wasn't the most explosive, but there was something there. There was an edge to him. What are your thoughts on Jonathan David? Is he someone that you looked at, because he gets spoken about a lot in Arsenal circles?
Yeah, it is. It's such an interesting one. I'm not going to pretend that I watch a huge amount of Liga and watch him week in, week out, but whenever I do see him, looks like a good striker. Whenever you look at the numbers that he puts up, you're going, okay, he's in the upper tiers of European strikers here. He's linked time and time again to big clubs, but we don't see it happen. And so it has always been a question like why and what's going on. And I mean, I wonder if Arsenal had really kind of seen him as an option, whether we'd have done it in January with 6 months left and gone, Lille, here's X amount, although obviously they probably wanted to keep him for this Champions League campaign. But no, it's an interesting one. And again, I feel like it could happen as a backup option if he's available in the summer.
I guess the difficult bit will be selling him the project. Not that you wouldn't want to come to Arsenal. Of course you'd want to come to Arsenal. But if I'm Jonathan David, I would want to be convinced that I'm the starting striker. Are they really going to convince him of that? I think that's the question. Not how he perceives himself so much as how does the rest of the world perceive him. And the way it's gone over the last couple of years, you look at him and you think, it's like that jumper you see on the sale rail, and you think, I wouldn't have bought that for full price. I'll buy it for half price. But will you wear it every day? That's the question, isn't it? And I think that's really where David is. If I'm him, I want to feel that I'm stepping up a level in terms of club, probably a Premier League club, because he would fit brilliantly here. But I would want to know that I'm going to go somewhere and be in the team every week. If I think I'm riding the bench, which maybe is the case at Arsenal, and if I was Arsenal, maybe I'd take him as a squad player challenging for a place in the first 11. Well, that's a different story, isn't it?
Whether that's going to be enough for him remains to be seen. In terms of the likelihood of this one happening, I think you're quite confident he might end up in the Premier League, but Arsenal specifically?
I don't think it really meets in terms of they expect a slightly higher level of striker. Maybe he's an A- and they want an A to A+. And I think he wants somewhere where he feels the main guy. So 3.
Rory, in terms of how much you want him, what I'm going to do is do it a little bit differently this time. I'm going to give you some names and you tell me whether you'd rather have Jonathan David ahead of them.
Right.
So Alexander Isak, I'm assuming.
Isak.
Yeah. Benjamin Sesko. Gyokeres. Osimhen.
David.
Lewandowski.
David.
Vlahovic.
David.
There you go.
Middle of the road, I think.
Middle of the road.
Like,
he's done all right there.
He has.
He's gone from Shed 7 to Coldplay.
He's done pretty well. Let's move on to Samu, currently at Porto. Andy, tell us a little bit about the player. I know he was linked with a Premier League move previously. It didn't happen. He's gone over to Portugal and he's doing pretty well from what I read. Yeah,
very, very close to joining Chelsea last summer. They changed the structure of the deal at the last minute and Atletico didn't like it, so they pulled out. And it was a real surprise to see him end up at Porto instead of the Premier League. So they sort of set up this deal where Atletico still own half of his sporting rights. Chelsea were due to pay 40 million for him. In the end, Porto paid 15 million euros for half of him. The idea being he would go out to Portugal, have a brilliant season, then they would sell him to a Premier League club, so it's not really a cancelling of his Premier League move, more of a year delaying of it. And then, because he's got an inflated value, that both Porto and Atletico make themselves a nice little bit of money. And he has done his bit of the bargain superbly. I think people have always looked at him, and you get it with a lot of sports people of sort of coming out of their teens, that they're so judged on the physical side of them. And, he is built like a brick outhouse. He's great in the air. He's impossible to muscle off the ball, but he's also quick. He's a very good finisher, and he's developing the other bit of his game as well. And if you think about this transfer market as it is at the moment, with FFP and PSR, it feels to me, and I don't know if it's the same for you guys, a lot of the time, that clubs, even the best clubs, would rather pay for potential, elite potential, than they would for the absolute finished thing, because there's some sort of prospect of development and resale and retaining value and all that sort of stuff. And Samu ticks all those boxes. people wondered whether he could score goals in any great volume. People knew he was capable of being a great striker when he was at Granada and then when he was at Atletico, and the Spain setup have known about him for a very long time. They wondered, could he put it in the ball in the net regularly? And he's proved this season at Porto he can. He's going along over a goal a start, which is pretty phenomenal when you consider he's only 20 years old and he had a very, very unsettled summer.
It's a great point that you make about the way that teams are sort of looking at exploiting potential now rather than buying the finished article. Rory, do you think Arsenal are in a position, though, where they can do that now with the centre-forward position? Because there's almost a demand, isn't there, that Arsenal get that position right now. We've waited for 2, maybe 3 seasons now for that real top-quality centre-forward. Would the fans accept another project signing like Samu?
I think they'd have to be sold on it. I do think there has been now an expectation placed that we've waited so long for this perfect striker. Well, if you're going to go and do it, it's going to need to be someone that the fans love straight away. With Samu, I think he's in that similar bracket to Sesko in terms of a lot of the kind of raw attributes are definitely there. If that was the only striking option that we went with, it would take time and he'd need to hit the ground running for us. He
would indeed. Andy, likelihood of him making the move to Arsenal, in your opinion?
It comes to the Premier League, definitely. I just wonder if he's really Arteta's type of player. I think he would represent excellent value. Like I said, I like someone who's a bit different to something that Arsenal traditionally have or already got. And I wonder, with all the forward players that are currently injured at the moment that come back, if he would be something, it would be something quite different that would really click in with them. And, Porto try and play quite progressive football. So he's shown he has more technical ability than a lot of people credit him for. But I'm not convinced he's Arteta's cup of tea, because if Sesko is a Jimmy, he's a sledgehammer. So I would probably give this 4.
Rory, Samu or Jonathan David then?
Ooh, I'd go Samu for the potential.
Potential is king at the moment, isn't it? It certainly feels that way in terms of how the market's working. Let's move on to a Serie A-based man in Marcus Thuram. Andy, I've been low-key very impressed with Marcus Thuram and that partnership he's developed with Lautaro up top. Is there a chance that he's even on the move, though? Is this something Arsenal could do?
Well, he's settled at Inter. He's having a great time. He quite enjoys winding his ex-Juventus player dad and his current Juventus player brother up on social media and in person, getting him a clip round the ear from Lilian at the title celebrations last year. He's been brilliant for Inter. And I think if people see him just play for France, they'll be a little bit underwhelmed because the goals haven't flowed and it's been a little bit awkward for them to find a spot to fit him. But I think that the partnership with Lautaro has been absolutely brilliant. He's someone who is a finisher, but not just that. You're getting an extraordinary amount of work out of him. If you're talking about a player who can run the channels, who has that technical ability, who has the pace, and who will never stop working for the team. If we're looking at all these options for Arsenal and all these possibilities, be they likely or dream, he would be up there as one of my absolute ideals for Arsenal. I think he would fit just like that. He's like a much better version of Gabriel Jesus, really. You can play him wide as well as in the centre, so there's a lot of crossover there, but he's just a better player. And he's got so much more to go, only in his mid-20s, of course. Inter would be loath to sell him, but, and there's always a but in Serie A, because no one there is absolutely swimming in money. Make them a big offer. You never know what might happen.
Make them an offer that they can't refuse. Rory, where does Marcus Thuram rank for you? Is he someone that would have been on your radar going into sort of the window that's just gone?
Yeah, I think definitely in the window that's just gone, you'd bring him in. I'd be more than happy with that. I think most Arsenal fans would. Like you said, I do think there's an element of, and I definitely had it, where you've seen him for France after you'd kind of heard about the hype about him originally and said, oh, is he that good? But you watch him for Inter and he is a very, very good player. Clearly, he can adapt and fit to a system, which I think is important for us. So, yeah, look, again, he's not in that real top bracket that I would want, but the next bracket down, he's definitely in the top sort of section of that.
Even though Andy made the point about Serie A not having the money, and I completely agree with that, I think sporting-wise, he will be fulfilled at Inter, which makes this harder to do in other ways, in that they're challenging for the Scudetto. They're a Champions League contender, in my opinion. And for that reason, it's going to be difficult to convince him that his future lays elsewhere and that the project is a more exciting one than the one he's already involved in.
That is true. The other side of that is you've got to remember he's had a very multinational upbringing. You just look at him following in Dad's footsteps, being a French international, playing in Serie A. But of course, he was born in Parma. He grew up in Barcelona. He speaks French, English, German, Spanish, Italian. If we're going back to like vintage Arsenal and that sort of combination of cultures, he fits really well with what makes Arsenal Arsenal. It would be really interesting to put the offer in front of him, I think.
Just very quickly, likelihood of this one happening, Marcus Thuram to Arsenal?
I think there are a lot of players who Inter would chip before him. So 4.5.
Rory, how keen would you be to sign him out of 10?
Yeah, I'd give him a 6. I'd put him in just above Samu.
Just above Samu in the rankings. Okay, final player we're going to discuss is a player that Arsenal apparently made an offer for during the January transfer window, and that is Aston Villa's Ollie Watkins. Rory, I'll come to you first on this. I don't know if you were the same, but when I read the news that Arsenal had made a bid for Ollie Watkins, I was really excited. And then I read that John Duran was on his way to Saudi Arabia, and I thought, hold on a minute, this can't happen. So what was the kind of emotional roller coaster that you went through, and what do you make of him in terms of his suitability?
Yeah, like I think at the time for a plug and play, instant impact, he would have been great. Like it was a very quick roller coaster, in fairness, and it turns out it seems like it was more Villa actually approached us because they needed to get rid of one of him and Duran, and we maybe came back with a number that was nowhere near what they wanted, which is frustrating given the situation that we've now left ourselves in. He's going to guarantee you goals. We know he can play in the Premier League. He's an Arsenal fan. Long term, I actually think quite a few of the names that we've mentioned would be better options. But for the short term, I'd have been delighted.
Andy, Ollie Watkins to Arsenal, is that the right signing for Arsenal? His age is always being brought up. That seems to be the blocking point for a lot of Arsenal fans.
Yeah, I guess that's it. When you look at the timeline of this Arsenal team, he maybe doesn't fit with some of those players. If you look at Saka, Martinelli, Saliba, Rice, etc., etc. But I don't know. For me, it's more of a stylistic issue. Arsenal play such different football to Villa. It feels to me as if he's a guarantee of goals for Villa. Does that mean he'd be a guarantee of goals for Arsenal? I mean, I love Ollie Watkins. I'm forever grateful for his contribution to the Euros and particularly that game against the Netherlands. I think this would have been quite a panic signing. And I think Arsenal can say, OK, that didn't work. We had a little flutter, a little moment. There are more suitable players we could get going forward.
I think at the time, if the price was right, I would have done it just to plug that hole for the next year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah.
And then you revisit the centre-forward market a couple of years down the line, maybe when things are looking a bit more, positive in terms of some of the targets that Arsenal have at the top of their list. But
I mean, let me ask you guys actually, with maybe this is slightly weighted by the injury problems that Arsenal have at the moment, but we're talking about which one striker would you buy? Is there an argument for buying two, like a finished article and a prospect?
I think there is. I don't know what Rory thinks, but I think there is an argument that at least Arsenal need two attackers. One could be a wide player that can contribute goals. I'm fine with that. But they definitely need two attackers. Is that not fair to say?
Yeah. I think for me, it's the striker and the left winger. I think that left wing elite level that's going to take us to the next level is probably just as important. We've got to do two midfielders probably, and there's a lot of other work to do. So I think if you were looking two centre forwards, is it time for a project one and the elite one that you want? Perhaps not, especially because we're going to be stuck with Gabriel Jesus for another season, and not getting him off the books is painful.
Just very quickly, likelihood of Arsenal revisiting that in the summer, in your opinion, Andy?
Well, they're obviously keen enough once, so I suppose I'd give it a 6, but don't do it. Don't do it.
Rory, in terms of how much you want him out of 10?
4 probably. I think it was, like you said, if we'd done it in January, I'd have understood it, I'd have backed it. We've not done that. We're paying the price for that now. It would then seem weird to go back on that if this was all part of the long-term plan.
I'd have been a 7 in January in terms of how much I wanted him, and now I'm probably at a 2 or 3.
Yeah,
right.
Which says quite a bit. Just very quickly to round off, because there have been some suggestions that Harry Kane could be looking to make a move back to the Premier League. That would go down like a lead balloon with the Tottenham fans. But Andy, would he be a good fit for Arsenal, even at this stage in his career and given his Tottenham history?
You know what? I kind of think it'll work. Because if you look at the way that he connects with, let's forget the whole Tottenham thing for a minute. If you look at the way he thrives for Bayern, I can't really think of a club team in the world that fit him more than Bayern. They've not wanted him to just be that stay in the penalty box guy. Even though he's ageing, they want him to drop to the centre circle. I can't think of a centre forward because with that sort of range of passing, because when he does drop to the centre circle, of course, he can always find the wide players. He can find Olise, he can find Sané, Gnabry, whoever's in there. And I think that makes him immensely valuable. If you think of him picking out Saka, Martinelli, am I convincing you yet? I mean, you know?
You're getting there.
Forget the Tottenham thing for a minute. Obviously, from your perspective, it would make Tottenham fans' heads explode as well. I mean, there has been ever such slight suggestion in Germany that maybe Bayern would consider selling Kane if they could get Gyokeres, to sort of sort out the age balance, I suppose.
Interesting. Rory, your take on that one?
I think it'd be hilarious. It would be hilarious. And I think he'd be a great addition to the squad. Like you said, I actually think he would fit in very well. You look at the way that Bayern's wide players are brought into the game. If we've got Saka and you've brought in this left winger, tying that all together with Harry Kane, and if he won something at the club as well, you'd be taking away Tottenham fans over the last decade. He's their guy. He's the one player, if anything, that they can hold on to and cherish. And if that whole memory was ruined, it would be hilarious.
Is Kane going to accept going and living in another country after he's retired, though? That's the question, isn't it?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I was listening to Andy there and I was thinking, God, that makes so much sense. And I really rate Harry Kane as a player. But under no circumstances, despite Andy's best efforts to convince me, do I want to see Harry Kane wearing an Arsenal shirt again, because he's obviously wore one when he was growing up as a kid. You're right, it would make the Tottenham fans' heads explode. But for me, aside from all of that stuff, when I watched him in the flesh at the Euros, I felt that he just lost that bit of intensity. And I think that might show a little bit more if he was to come back to the Premier League than it does in the Bundesliga, just because the leagues are different in their styles. So, yeah, I'm not sure that Harry Kane is that good anymore that I would make that exception and accept his past. Anyway, thank you very much, guys, for tuning in to the transfer list. Pleasure to have you with us. Thank you to Rory Talks Football and the brilliant Andy Brassell. Make sure you like, subscribe, and all the rest of it. And we'll see you soon.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app, and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.